Randolph Bourne, who wrote during World War I, said that war is the health of the state. So many individuals have ways of declaring war, and there's always a war against poverty, a war against illiteracy, a war against terrorism, a war against drugs. Endlessly, there's a war to generate the enthusiasm for big government. But quite frankly, what we should be is very careful anytime anybody in Washington declares a war, because it's usually a war on our civil liberties. Occurred on 9/11. We cannot deny it, but we cannot ignore it, and we should understand it and know why it occurred. For one reason that it occurred is that we lost our way on assuming responsibility for ourselves. We had turned over to the federal government the assumption that the federal government will make us safe at airports. We had the federal government's involved with the inspection. We had the federal government rules, no guns on airplanes. We had the federal government rule that says never resist terrorists. Don't you think that might have opened up a door for a system that, or a group of people that wanted to attack us? But we also have to realize that the motives behind this are very, very important. But the truth is, if we had been following the rules and assuming the responsibility and making companies assume responsibility for making us safe when we're on their airplanes, that is, a lot more respect for the Second Amendment would have taken care of that problem. That 9/11 changed a lot. Unfortunately, it has changed things in a negative manner. It has been the excuse for our government to do some things that they had been planning on doing all along, and this was just a reason because the people's guard would be down and the people were frightened. So if you're frightened economically, you yield to the government. If we're frightened by an attack, then we yield to the government and sacrifice our liberties. And just think of what has happened. Within weeks, they came up with a bill that had been floating around for a long time. It was called the Patriot Act, an act that ought to be quickly repealed. The anti-Second Amendment group says that guns cause crime, so therefore we have to regulate guns, and they want to register the guns and regulate the people who own the guns. We know that isn't true. But since 9/11, we know there are dangerous people out there, and that we should deal with them. And there are ways of doing this. But how do we deal with the criminals? By registering all the American people with a national ID card. We don't need that. But we have passed many other laws. The Military Courts Act has been passed. The Insurrection Act has been repealed. Posse Comitatus has been repealed. And we are systematically undermining our liberties here at home. And unless that is reversed, believe me, there will be somebody come down the road one of these days that will make use of those rules and laws that have been put on the books. The repeal of the Insurrection Act I consider one of the most dangerous things that they have done. It was passed through without much fanfare. It was passed through as part of the DOD budget in the year 2006. And literally what it has said is the president now can declare emergency for as much as illnesses or a hurricane or who knows what, public disorder. He can declare a national emergency, declare martial law, call up the Air National Guard without the governor's permission, take the Air National Guard and put it in another state for a year without congressional approval. Those kind of powers are not part of the Constitution, and they're not part of the American spirit and our liberties. Now, we must reject them. An American citizen today can be declared an illegal combatant and held without court review, without a judge, without a lawyer, endlessly. literally forever. And that means that you now have no habeas corpus in this country. Fortunately, it has not been used against a massive number of American people. A few. But where does it start? But it's the principle that counts. Once you reject it for 1 or 2 or 3, and it becomes a precedent, and the Congress doesn't stand up to it, it becomes the law of the land and it will be abused. That is why the freedoms that we have left in this country, we must utilize and make sure that we reclaim our liberties and make this revolution really work. There's one other war that had been declared many years ago. It was declared in the early 1970s, which I believe very sincerely was ill-advised. It was motivated by many good people, but it was motivated for the wrong reason. It was motivated by the thought that government believed they could make you a better person by messing around with your habits. It's sort of the same motivation that prompted our government, our people, to amend the Constitution in 1919 for prohibition of alcohol. It was a mess. It turned the alcohol. Did the people quit drinking? No. It was turned over to the criminals, and it ended up promoting bad alcohol and deaths from contaminated, all terrible problems. And of course, the people wised up and they repealed it. But wasn't that rather miraculous, the respect they had at the time for the Constitution? As bad as prohibition was, they had enough respect to amend the Constitution. But what do they do today? For the past 35 years, we've had this war on drugs, which is a total failure. It doesn't work. It literally has cost close to $400 billion to promote this war, and it means that it's an excuse once again to invade your privacy and tell you what to do. And this doesn't mean that we endorse the things that occur in a free society. If it's legal to drink alcohol if you drink too much, that doesn't mean that we endorse it. And any violence you have to condemn. In the same way in these other areas. Because this is not part of what our traditions have been about. This is new, this is different. But it's an excuse. And unfortunately, I think one of the reasons that so many of these motivations for invasion of our privacy and looking at financial records probably has to do with the tax code as much as anything. And that, of course, is the reason why the ultimate solution for this is reducing the spending in this government so there is no need whatsoever for the income tax.